He thought he had left her with nothing until he found a key in her husband's grave. Hazel Morrow, 72 years old, stood in an attorney's office on a Tuesday in February 2023 and learned that her son had taken everything. The house on Birch Street where she had lived for 41 years, gone. The $94,000 in savings she and her husband had built across 4 decades of packed lunches and used cars and $50 deposits every single month, gone. The dining table where she had served 11,000 dinners, the garden she'd kept since 1985, the bedroom closet that still smelled faintly, impossibly of James. All of it, gone. Signed away while she was still in the raw, bewildered first weeks of widowhood, before she had thought to ask a single question about what came next. She sat in the straight-backed chair across from the attorney's desk and held her purse in both hands and looked at the document her son had slid across the table toward her. Outside the window, the February sky over Dunlap, Tennessee, was the color of old dishwater. Somewhere in the building, a clock ticked. Her son, Grant, sat to her left with his folder open and his pen ready, and the expression of a man who is prepared for every possible response except the one he is about to receive. Her daughter, Lynette, sat to her right and said nothing yet. What they had left her was a single envelope. Inside it, a deed to 31.4 acres of unimproved rocky hillside in Grundy County that her husband, James, had purchased for $800 in 1979. The attorney read the property description aloud. Unimproved acreage. No structures of value, no utilities. Access via dirt track off Route 108. Assessed value, $4,200. Grant said she should be grateful to have anything at all. But what Grant Morrow and his sister Lynette did not know, what neither of them had thought to ask about in 44 years of living, was that their father had been a quiet man, a deliberate man, a man who, when a problem seemed largest, grew not louder but stiller, and who had spent 4 years thinking through exactly this possibility. He had bought that rocky hillside in 1979. He had kept it off every document that mattered. He had hired a geologist in 2019. He had read the report twice, locked it in a metal box, and then hidden the box in the most permanent place he knew. And he had hidden the key where only one person on earth would ever think to look. His wife came every Sunday. Rain, cold, fog, the deep grief of that first winter. She came every Sunday with fresh flowers. She was the only one who did. He had counted on that. He had counted on her the way he had counted on her for 46 years, completely and without announcement. If you have ever been told, by someone who was supposed to love you, that you have become a problem to be solved, this story is for you. My name is the voice of Dreams Don't Age, and today I want to tell you about a woman who discovered, at 72, that the man she had spent her entire adult life loving had never, not once, stopped protecting her. Stay with me until the very end, because what Hazel Morrow found beneath 31.4 acres of land nobody wanted in the spring of 2023 will make you reconsider everything you think you know about what it means to be left with nothing. If this is your first time here, subscribe to Dreams Don't Age. We are building something together. Let's begin. Hazel Jean Merritt was born on March 8, 1951, in a white frame house outside Dayton, Tennessee, the youngest of 3 daughters of a hardware store owner named Clifton Merritt and his wife, Annalie, who taught Sunday school and made a chess pie that people drove 20 minutes to eat. She grew up in the kind of household where work was not discussed but simply done, where the dishes were washed before bed without being asked, where her mother pressed clothes on Sunday evenings with the radio on low, and where the expectation, never spoken aloud but absorbed into the walls like smoke, was that a good woman was a quiet woman, and a quiet woman made no trouble, and making no trouble was its own form of love. She was not by nature a quiet person, but she was a disciplined one. She had learned to be. She met James Morrow at a church social in the summer of 1975. He was 26, and he worked at the Sequatchie Valley Electric Cooperative, running power lines through the rural hollows of Grundy County, and he had dark hair going early to grey at the temples, and a particular way of listening, truly listening, the full weight of his attention on whoever was speaking, that Hazel had never encountered in a man before, and would never entirely stop marvelling at. He asked her to dance at the social, and then forgot to stop talking to her for the rest of the evening. He called the following Wednesday. He called the Wednesday after that. He was not a man who wasted motion, and by October he had told her in the straightforward way of a man who does not see the point of indirection that he intended to marry her when she was ready. She was ready by April. They married on April 9th, 1977, in the Methodist Church where Annalie taught Sunday school. The ceremony lasted 22 minutes and cost $340 including the flowers. Hazel wore her older sister's dress, taken in 2 inches at the waist. James wore a brown suit purchased at Sears in Chattanooga for $58. They drove to Gatlinburg for 3 days and came home to a rented duplex on Poplar Street in Dunlap that cost $185 a month and had a kitchen window that looked out on a persimmon tree. Grant came in 1979, Lynette in 1982. For the next 4 decades, Hazel's life had a particular texture that was not glamorous and not newsworthy, and was, in every way that mattered, irreplaceable. She rose at 5:45 every morning to start the coffee before James left for work. She packed his lunch in a black metal box, bologna sandwich on white bread, an apple, 2 oatmeal cookies, every working day for 31 years, without being asked and without being thanked in so many words, and without requiring thanks, because it was simply the vocabulary of her love and she spoke it fluently. She kept the house at 47 Birch Street in a state of order that the neighbors admired, and that James once told his co-worker at the cooperative was the most welcoming house in Sequatchie County. He said it without exaggeration, and the co-worker, who had been to dinner 3 times, agreed. She sewed her children's school clothes through 8th grade, cutting the patterns on the kitchen table and stitching them on her mother's old Singer machine. She kept a vegetable garden from April through October, tomatoes, green beans, squash, and canned 43 quarts of tomatoes in the summer of 1989. The same summer she had the knee trouble, and she canned them anyway because the garden did not pause for a sore knee, and neither did she. She worked part-time at a fabric shop on Main Street from 1986 to 2003, earning between $6.25 and $10.50 per hour over those 17 years. She handed every paycheck to the joint account without ever asking what the balance was, because she trusted James the way you trust the floor beneath your feet. Not because you have thought carefully about it, but because it has never once given way. James, for his part, was worth trusting. He was not a man who bought things he didn't need or speculated on things he didn't understand. He drove used cars until they quit. He saved $50 every month from the first month of their marriage to the last, a habit so automatic it had become invisible, the way breathing is invisible. He was not a man who said he loved her in elaborate ways. He showed it in the things he thought about when he thought about the future. The furnace replaced before it failed, the roof reshingled ahead of schedule, the savings account that grew the way a careful garden grows, slowly and without drama. By the time he retired from the Sequatchie Valley Electric Cooperative in 2009, after 31 years, they had $94,000 in savings and owned the house on Birch Street outright. It was worth approximately $214,000 at that time. They owed nothing to anyone. There were things Hazel did not know. She did not know that in 1979, the same year Grant was born, James had used $800 from a small year-end bonus to purchase 31.4 acres of rocky hillside in the eastern corner of Grundy County, land a realtor friend had offered almost apologetically, land with no road but a faint dirt track, and no water but a rocky spring on the eastern slope that steamed faintly even in the July heat. James had mentioned the purchase once, early on, and Hazel had nodded and thought of it no further. It was a piece of ground, it was $800. James had a reason for things. She did not know that in October 2019, James had quietly hired a geological survey firm out of Knoxville, Appalachian Geological Survey Services, and paid $3,400 to have the Grundy County property properly assessed. She did not know what the firm's lead geologist, Dr. Paul Alcott, found when his team spent 3 days on that hillside with their instruments and their maps. She did not know about the 34-page report that arrived by mail in November 2019, which James read twice at the kitchen table while she was out, and then folded into a manila envelope and placed inside a fireproof metal lockbox the size of a shoebox. She did not know where he put the box. She did not know what he did with the key. She did not know because James was a quiet man, and because he had his reasons, and because he died before he could explain them. The COVID-19 virus reached Sequatchie County in January 2023. James Morrow, who had not been seriously ill a single day in his 73 years of life, contracted it on a Tuesday and was in the hospital by Saturday and was gone 11 days after the first symptom. Hazel was with him at the end, holding his right hand. Grant was standing by the window. Lynette arrived 40 minutes after the time of death was recorded. 112 people came to the funeral. Men James had worked with 30 years before drove from across the county to stand in the January cold and say simply that he had been a decent man. Hazel stood at the reception for 4 hours and shook every hand and thanked every person, and did not sit down, because she was in the particular trance of grief that keeps a person moving and upright and capable of speech until much later alone it does not. What Hazel knew about her children was this: they had grown into adults she recognized but did not entirely understand. Grant Morrow, 44, lived in a suburb of Nashville with his wife and 2 children, in a house that had cost $618,000 and had an HOA fee of $340 per month. He was a financial analyst for a regional investment firm, and he wore pressed shirts even on weekends, and he called his mother on her birthday and at Christmas, and stopped by once a year at Thanksgiving when it could not be avoided. He had not come to Dunlap in the 3 years before his father died, except for the funeral itself. At the funeral he stood by the casket with his phone in his jacket pocket and checked it twice during the service. Hazel saw. She said nothing. Lynette Adair, 41, lived in Chattanooga, worked in marketing for a large healthcare company, and had the particular gift, which Hazel had noticed for years without naming, of turning any conversation, no matter where it began, back toward herself within 4 exchanges. She had said at Thanksgiving 2021, while Hazel was describing a neighbor's hip surgery, "That reminds me of when I had my procedure last spring," and had spoken for the next 18 minutes. James had caught Hazel's eye across the table. Neither of them changed expression. There had been other moments earlier, smaller, that Hazel had absorbed the way you absorb a small chill. A comment Grant made in 2019 about the house requiring a lot of upkeep for 2 people your age. A text from Lynette in 2022. "Mom, have you and Dad thought about your plan? For when things get harder, there are some really lovely communities near Chattanooga." Hazel had waited 3 days to respond. She said, "We're fine, honey. Thank you for thinking of us." She had trusted the way a woman who has built her life on love tends to trust, completely, and without examining the cracks. 6 weeks after the funeral, Grant called and said he needed to meet with her about the estate. He said he wanted to bring Lynette. He said they should meet at the office of an attorney in downtown Dunlap, a man named Webb Calloway, who handled property and estate matters. He said it the way you say something you have rehearsed enough times that it sounds almost casual. Hazel agreed. She put on the blue dress James had liked and drove herself there. Grant and Lynette were already seated when she arrived. Webb Calloway, a man of 52 with wire-rimmed glasses and an expression Hazel could not read, placed 3 manila folders on the table. Grant had his own folder already open. Lynette had a yellow legal pad covered in notes she had clearly prepared in advance. Hazel noticed the notes and thought of the Thanksgiving table and the way James had caught her eye, and she folded her hands in her lap and waited. Grant began. He explained in the measured, slightly too slow voice of a man reciting something prepared that their father had signed a durable power of attorney in 2018, during a brief health scare that had resolved without complication, naming Grant as his financial and legal agent. He explained that this document, which Hazel herself had signed as a witness, had remained active until James's death. He explained that in the weeks following the funeral, acting as his father's agent and in accordance with his father's expressed wishes, he had taken several steps to settle the estate. Hazel listened. She kept her hands folded. The house at 47 Birch Street, Grant said, had been transferred into Grant's name as primary heir. The $94,000 in the joint savings account had been dispersed, $62,000 to Grant, $32,000 to Lynette, reflecting their agreement on equitable distribution per their father's wishes. He slid the first folder toward her. These were the documents. "And for me," Hazel said. It was not quite a question. Lynette looked down at her legal pad. "There's a piece of property, Mom, in Grundy County. Dad had it on the books." Grant removed a deed from his folder and set it in front of her. 31.4 acres, unimproved, rocky hillside, no utilities, no road access beyond a dirt track. He paused. "There's an old hunting cabin on the parcel, but it's in significant disrepair, essentially rubble." Another pause. "The county has it assessed at $4,200. $4,000, Hazel said. "And 200, Lynette said, as though the precision mattered. "We looked into listing it," Grant said, "but honestly, there's no market for it. So it passes to you." Hazel looked at the deed. She looked at the address. She looked at the number. $800 original purchase price, 1979, printed in faded type at the bottom of the transfer history. "Everything else," she said, carefully, evenly. "The house, the savings, 46 years of everything." "It was Dad's estate," Grant said. "He'd already structured it." "We're not trying to be hurtful," Lynette said. She had placed one hand on the table in Hazel's direction, palm up, a performed gesture. "We know this is a lot to process. But, Mom, you have to be realistic. You're 72. That house is a 4-bedroom house. It requires maintenance you can't manage alone. Grant is going to handle the listing, and what we were thinking is that we could help you find something more appropriate. There are beautiful independent living communities." "Burden," Hazel said. Lynette stopped. "Is that the word you're looking for?" "That I am a burden." Lynette's expression rearranged itself into something that resembled concern. "Nobody said that." "We want what's best for you," Grant said, using the voice people use when they have decided in advance what is best. Hazel looked at her son. She looked at her daughter. She looked at these two people she had carried inside her body, whose school clothes she had sewn, whose fevers she had sat through, whose college acceptance letters she had kept in the top drawer of her dresser in a folder tied with kitchen string. And she picked up the deed, folded it once, and put it in her purse. She stood up. She thanked Webb Calloway by name. She did not thank her children. She walked out of the office and down the stairs and 2 blocks to a side street where she had parked her car. And she got in and closed the door and pressed both palms flat on the steering wheel and put her forehead down on the backs of her hands and cried. She made no sound. She had learned sometime in her early 30s not to cry out loud. The tears ran down the side of her nose and dripped onto her knuckles, and she sat like that for 11 minutes by the clock on the dashboard, and then she sat up, blew her nose with a tissue from her purse, started the engine, and drove home. The 30 days that followed were the kind of long that has nothing to do with time. Grant arrived on day 4 with a real estate agent, a young woman named Brittany who wore a blazer and moved through the house with a clipboard, opening closets and measuring rooms, and making notes aloud to herself or to Grant, all while Hazel sat at the kitchen table with her coffee. Brittany said the kitchen tile was dated. She said the primary bedroom would present better with neutral paint. She said these things to Grant, not to Hazel, though Hazel was 5 feet away. At no point did she address Hazel directly. At no point did Grant suggest she should. Hazel was a piece of furniture in her own home. She was beginning to understand that she had been for some time. Lynette came on day 9 to help sort through James's belongings. She went through his closet and his study, with the purposeful speed of a woman who has assigned herself a task, making piles on the bed. A keep pile, a goodwill pile, a pile that went directly into Lynette's car. She took James's good flannel shirts. She took the small wooden box on his dresser, where he kept his change and his cufflinks and his pocket watch, a Bulova silver that his father had given him when he started work at the cooperative. Lynette turned it over in her hands and said it might be worth something. She said she would have it looked at. She did not ask Hazel if she wanted it. On the 14th night, Hazel sat at the kitchen table at 11 o'clock with a legal pad and a calculator she'd found in the junk drawer. She wrote down what she had. Social Security, $1,140 per month. No pension, no investments. The deed to 31.4 acres assessed at $4,200, and one personal checking account she had opened on her own in 2004, quietly, without discussion, with no particular reason other than some small instinct she had never examined, that currently held $56.38. She wrote the number down and looked at it for a long time. She could not afford a Dunlap apartment. A one-bedroom ran $875 to $1,100 per month. She could stay with her sister Connie in Dayton, but Connie's house had stairs and a guest room with a single bed, and the particular silence of a person waiting patiently to become a problem. She would not do that to Connie. She would not do that to herself. She heard them on the 18th night through the wall, Grant and Lynette in the living room, talking in the low, comfortable voices of people who believe they are not being overheard. She caught, "Can't carry her forever." And then Lynette, lighter, almost amused, "Should have done this 2 years ago?" And then a short laugh, not cruel in the theatrical sense, but easy. The laugh of people for whom a difficult thing has been successfully managed. Hazel went back to the kitchen. She sat down with the legal pad. She thought about James, about the way he always, when a problem was at its worst, became most still. She thought about the rocky hillside in Grundy County. She thought about the $800 and the year 1979 and the particular expression James had worn when he had something figured out. She thought, he had reasons for things. She packed her life into 3 suitcases and 2 cardboard boxes. 46 years of marriage, 41 years in that house. 3 suitcases, 2 boxes, and a wedding photograph nobody had thought to claim. She left the furniture because it was no longer hers. She took her sewing machine, which was. She took James's Bible from the nightstand before Lynette could make a pile of it. She took the photograph of herself and James in Gatlinburg, 1977, the one where they are both laughing at something the photographer said, in which James looks 26 and she looks like the woman she had been before she learned to stay quiet. She left on the morning of March 3rd, 2023. She did not say goodbye to the house. She backed out of the driveway at 47 Birch Street for the last time and did not look in the rearview mirror. She went first to the cemetery. It was a Sunday. She had always come on Sundays, and the March air was raw and damp, the kind of cold that does not sit on your coat but gets through it. She had bought yellow daffodils at the grocery store because yellow had been James's favorite, and she carried them through the rows of headstones in her good shoes because she had forgotten to change them in the rush of leaving, and she no longer cared. She knelt beside the headstone. James Morrow, 1949, 2023. Beloved husband and father. She replaced the old chrysanthemums, brown at the edges now 2 weeks gone, with the daffodils pressing their stems down into the zinc vase bolted to the stone's base. Her fingers found something. Taped to the underside of the vase, pressed flat against the cold metal with weathered electrical tape, gone brittle at the edges. A small flat key. Brass. Worn smooth from handling. Attached to nothing. She sat back on her heels in the cemetery mud in her good shoes, and held the key in both hands and looked at it for a very long time. Then she drove to Grundy County. The address on the deed took her east on Route 108, through the valley, past the point where the pavement narrowed to a single lane, past a hand-lettered sign for a bait shop that had gone dark, then onto a dirt track barely wider than her car, descending slightly through second-growth forest, soft with spring mud. The GPS announced, in its placid voice, "You have arrived at your destination." There was no mailbox. There was no visible structure. There was only a gap in the tree line and the track going down through the bare trees. She sat with the engine running for several minutes. She thought, James bought this in 1979 for $800. She thought he never sold it in 44 years, though he could have. She thought he taped a key to the underside of a grave vase and positioned it where only one person would ever look, and that person just found it, and here she is. She got out of the car. The track was soft and her shoes sank with each step. She walked. The trees were bare-branched, but beginning barely at the very tips of the upper branches to show the first suggestion of green. Not quite leaves, not yet, but the idea of them, the intention. Somewhere in the unseen canopy, a woodpecker worked at a dead trunk in short, deliberate bursts. The air smelled of wet earth and pine resin, and something else. Something mineral and faintly warm like river stones in afternoon sun, something that had no right to be warm on a cold March morning. The cabin appeared through the trees after about 120 yards. Grant had called it rubble. Grant had not been entirely wrong. The roof had lost perhaps a third of its original corrugated tin, the remaining sections orange with rust, daylight showing through in 2 places. Both windows on the south face were without glass. The front door hung on one hinge, open to the weather, and the leaves of 2 or 3 autumns had blown inside and settled in the corners in drifts. But the walls were native limestone, cut and laid in courses that had settled without failing, 18 inches thick at the base. The chimney, stone like the walls, rising above the roofline by 4 feet, stood plumb. The floor was stone. Beneath the mat of leaves she could see it. The same limestone as the walls, fit close, solid, unchanged. The structure had been abandoned. It had not been beaten. She stood in the middle of the single room and turned slowly in a circle, looking at the walls, at the light coming through the broken roof at the hearthstone, a single slab of grey limestone roughly 4 feet across, undisturbed, exactly as it had been set. The air in the cabin was cold and smelled of leaves and mice and old ash. Outside, the faint warmth she had detected on the air came and went on the breeze. From the eastern slope, not visible from the cabin door, she heard the soft sound of moving water. "Okay, James," she said to the walls to the valley below her, to the man who had driven her here as surely as if he'd been in the passenger seat. Okay. She did not have electricity, and she did not have running water, and she did not have heat beyond what the fireplace could give her, and she did not have a bed beyond the back seat of her Honda Accord, and that is where she slept the first 3 nights while she worked, to make the cabin livable enough to sleep inside. She had, in the trunk, her sewing machine, 3 suitcases, 2 boxes, James's Bible, a sleeping bag she had found in the back of the hall closet while packing, a flashlight, a box of kitchen matches, 4 cans of chicken soup, a loaf of bread, and $56.38. She had $1,140 coming on the 1st of April.